Hi everyone, now you're watching my channel. All the content I create myself, new videos every day, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Thanks, bye.
It was early morning, the kind where the sky was still undecided between gray and blue, and the air carried that sharp bite of early autumn. The bare trees along Summit Ridge leaned slightly in the cold wind as Dana Mitchell guided her black SUV through the empty streets. Inside, the low murmur of public radio filled the cabin, soft enough to feel like background breathing, peaceful to the point of sleepy. One hand rested on the steering wheel while the other adjusted the collar of her black vest over the white shirt beneath. A small habit when the morning chills slipped past the car's heater. She wore the same uniformed calm she carried into every day, though today her mind was on the closed-door meeting ahead at the federal building. As an investigator for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, she was used to early starts, the kind that let her bypass the rush-hour eyes that sometimes asked questions without words. The quiet, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" that came in glances rather than sentences. The road stretched ahead in an unbroken line, no headlights coming toward her, no brake lights fading in the distance, just her vehicle moving through the silence. Then the world behind her lit up in a sudden flash of red and blue. Dana's stomach didn't drop, it tightened, the way muscle remembers a familiar weight. She glanced at the speedometer. Perfectly legal. She hadn't rolled through a sign, hadn't touched her phone. There was no one else on the street. Just her, and now the patrol car. She eased the SUV to the curb, the motion deliberate, her hands steady even as her jaw set ever so slightly. In the reflection of the mirror, the lights painted the inside of the cabin in pulses of color. She shifted the gear into park and exhaled once, quiet and measured, before reaching with slow precision to lower the window. Cold air swept in like a second presence. The early morning peace fractured into something taut, something that hummed with the question she had learned to expect but never accepted. Why me, here, now? The patrol car idled behind her, its engine low and constant, while she sat still, one hand lingering near the silver band on her ring finger, the metal cool against her skin. She didn't move for her license yet. She didn't reach for the glove box. Not until she saw him. Through the corner of her eye, a figure stepped out of the cruiser. The crunch of his boots against the pavement broke the quiet rhythm of the moment. Dana's thumb tapped the steering wheel once, not out of nerves but instinct, an old ritual of readiness. The neighborhood around them stayed asleep, unaware that the kind of morning that changes things had just begun. Officer Clark Reynolds approached with the slow, measured steps of someone who believed the space in front of him was his to define. His uniform was neat, his sunglasses reflecting the dull morning light, and even before he spoke, Dana felt the familiar weight of authority being lowered into the space between them. He leaned slightly toward the open window, his tone polite enough to sound routine, but with an undercurrent that made the question something else entirely. "Morning. License and registration, please." Dana nodded once, keeping her movements deliberate, her right hand sliding slowly toward the glove box. She handed the documents over without hurry, watching his fingers brush them with barely a glance before his next words landed. "So, what brings you to this neighborhood this early?" The question was dressed in casualness, but Dana heard the layer beneath it, the quiet suspicion stitched into the phrasing. She tilted her head just slightly, keeping her expression calm. "Driving to work." It was the truth and nothing more, offered in the even tone of someone who had answered this question before and knew it was never really about the answer. Reynolds didn't look convinced. "We've had some unusual traffic around here lately. Folks don't usually cut through Summit Ridge unless they're up to something. You live here?" He let the pause stretch, waiting for her to stumble into something that fit the picture he was already painting. Dana met his stare, the cool air brushing against her face as she said, "No." That single word carried more weight than she wanted it to. He shifted, scanning her face, her hands, the interior of the car as if a story might materialize that explained her presence in the wrong zip code at the wrong hour. Her thumb moved against the silver band on her ring finger, a quiet rotation of metal on skin. It was a habit, a tether to calm when everything around her wanted to pull her into reaction. 3 stops this year. 3 different excuses, each one dressed in the language of procedure, each one rooted in the same soil. She heard her father's voice in her head from years ago, steady and serious, when, not if. That's how he had taught her to survive the roadside theater. Her brother hadn't been so lucky. A stop that started with just routine had bled into an arrest, then hearings, then 2 years of college gone and a permanent record that no apology could erase. That memory slid into the present now, not as panic, but as steel sharpening under her ribs. Reynolds adjusted his stance, the subtle shift of someone who thought the balance of control was his. Dana's voice stayed even, each word placed carefully on neutral ground. "I'm on my way to the federal building on West 48th. His eyebrow lifted, a flicker of curiosity masking something else. His eyes moved over her, a slow calculation that felt less like observation and more like judgment, as if mapping whether someone like her belonged anywhere near that address. She didn't flinch under it. She gave him nothing but stillness. The cold air moved between them, carrying the weight of an old story being told again in real time. Reynolds' lips pressed together, not quite a smile, not quite disapproval, just the unreadable expression of a man deciding what kind of stop this would be. Dana sat in the silence without filling it. That was its own answer, and one he wasn't expecting. Reynolds let the silence linger just long enough to make it feel intentional, then his gaze slid past her shoulder into the back seat. His eyes paused on the black hard-shell case resting beside her laptop bag, and when he spoke again, his voice carried that same practiced casualness that always signaled the start of something heavier. "Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?" The words were framed as a question, but they didn't land like one. Dana felt the shift immediately, the air tightening in the narrow space between them. She didn't move, letting the request hang there, suspended in the chilled morning air like breath she refused to release. Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to sound almost gentle. "Is there a legal reason for a search?" Not defiant, not sharp, but deliberate, each word set down like a line drawn in chalk. Reynolds' jaw tightened, a small twitch of muscle that told her she had stepped onto ground he hadn't expected her to know existed. "Just routine," he said after a beat, the phrase delivered with the weight of something well-rehearsed. "You know, with all the carjackings lately, we've been asked to keep an eye out for anything out of place." Carjackings. Dana almost smiled, though nothing reached her face. It was always something, some vague precaution dressed in the language of safety, just official enough to sound like policy, but soft enough to disappear if anyone pushed too hard. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Inside the SUV, mounted low and discreet near the dashboard, the DOJ-issued dashcam had been recording since the first flash of red and blue behind her. She hadn't touched it. She never did. Standard protocol for investigators like her. No sudden moves, no negotiations, no performance. Just capture the truth exactly as it is when it thinks no one is watching. Her eyes stayed on him, unblinking, while her mind calculated. The case in the back held more than just papers. Inside were sealed documents tied directly to the Summit Ridge investigation, the same precinct stamped across the badge on his chest. If he opened it, if he even touched it, the entire operation risked exposure. She could almost feel the weight of the file pressing into the air between them. Reynolds shifted again, the faintest scrape of his boot on the pavement. He wasn't used to this kind of stillness. Most people filled it, tried to explain, tried to appease. Dana let it grow until it was something he had to wrestle with. Her hand stayed loose on the steering wheel, thumb brushing the cool silver of her ring in a slow, steady rotation. He glanced into the back again, then back at her, as if waiting for a crack to form in her composure. There wasn't one. Just need to make sure everything's clean, he added, a half step closer to her door. That was the moment she let her left hand drop casually, almost idly, toward the flat panel beneath the steering column. Her thumb pressed against the small, flush button that looked like nothing and meant everything. A silent ping pulsed out, a timestamp, a location, a signal sent straight into DOJ systems. Nothing flashy. No alarms. Just a quiet marker that the line had been crossed. She didn't look down. Didn't acknowledge it. Reynolds didn't notice. He was too busy trying to decide whether to lean further into authority or pull back. The wind moved through the trees above them, a faint rustle that felt louder than either of their breaths. Dana kept her eyes on him, the same even gaze she used across interrogation tables, though now it was her on the receiving end of the power game. Only this time, she knew the rules better than the man writing them in real time. She said nothing, and in that silence, the weight of the moment shifted, subtle but undeniable, like a scale tipping one grain at a time. Reynolds didn't answer her question right away. The muscles in his jaw worked once, a small, visible grind, and then he stepped back just far enough to scan the SUV again, like the air around it might provide him with justification he hadn't found yet. Dana stayed still, her hand resting lightly near the steering wheel, thumb brushing the silver band in a slow, unconscious loop. The cold morning seemed to tighten around them, then the low hum of another engine broke the fragile quiet. In her side mirror, Dana caught the flash of another patrol car, rolling to a stop behind Reynolds' cruiser. The second vehicle idled for a moment before the door opened, and a younger officer stepped out, his uniform crisp, his eyes moving quickly from Dana's SUV to Reynolds' posture. Back up. Not unexpected, but it sent a ripple through the air all the same. Dana felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, not fear exactly, but calculation. One officer could be unpredictable, two could become momentum, and momentum on the side of authority had a way of rewriting mornings in permanent ink. Reynolds straightened a little as the younger man approached, his tone low enough that Dana couldn't catch the words but not the shape of them. Control, reassure, establish narrative. She had seen this choreography before. Her own silence became sharper in contrast, a quiet refusal to step into the script being written outside her window. The second officer glanced toward her, a flicker of something unreadable in his face before settling into the neutral expression they were all trained to wear. Dana let her breath out slowly, not wanting even the rise and fall of her chest to look like concession. Her finger hovered near the small panel beneath the steering column, not out of doubt, but out of affirmation. The ping was sent. The situation was marked. Now it was about patience, about letting the moment define itself. Reynolds leaned back toward the window, his voice carrying a thin edge of insistence wrapped in procedure. Just a quick look inside, ma'am. Won't take but a second. Dana met his gaze without blinking, her own voice low but steady. You've seen my license. You have my registration. You've inspected the vehicle visually. Unless you have probable cause, a search isn't lawful. The words landed with the soft weight of certainty, not raised, not defiant, just placed where they couldn't be moved. Behind Reynolds, the younger officer shifted his stance, a subtle tilt that Dana didn't miss. He knew the line she had drawn, even if he would never say it out loud. The air between them thickened into a standoff made of restraint rather than force. Dana stayed in the center of it, anchored not by the badge in her wallet or the case in her back seat, but by the knowledge that sometimes the quietest moments carried the most weight. She didn't need to win. She just needed to hold. And in that holding she felt the balance begin to tilt, almost imperceptible, the first crack in a structure built on assumption. Reynolds hesitated just a fraction too long, and in that sliver of silence, Dana felt the tension fold back on itself. His authority didn't vanish, but it wavered, the edges softening under the weight of her refusal to step into the role he'd silently assigned her. Without another word, he extended her license, his fingers brushing the edge of the card like a reluctant surrender. "Drive safe," he said, the phrase clipped, neutral, the kind of line meant to close a scene without admitting anything had been wrong with it. Dana took the license and slid it back into her wallet without looking at him, her movements calm, unhurried. She didn't thank him. There was nothing to thank. When she pulled away from the curb, she kept the SUV steady, not accelerating, not performing anything that could be read as flight. In the rear view, the patrol car lingered in the center of the frame, its lights now dark, shrinking slowly against the muted palette of morning as she put distance between them. The hum of the engine was the only sound inside the cabin until the security booth of the Federal Building garage came into view. The guard at the gate glanced up, recognized her immediately, and lifted the barrier with a nod. "Morning, Miss Mitchell." She offered a quiet morning in return, her voice steady, though her shoulders felt heavier than they had an hour ago. She parked on the lower level, the concrete walls swallowing the last echo of her engine. For a moment she stayed seated, fingers resting on the steering wheel, the faint warmth of the earlier encounter still clinging to the air around her like static. Then she reached for the secure DOJ-issued device mounted beneath the dashboard, her thumb moving through the practiced sequence to transfer the footage. The screen on her phone lit up with the status bar. Uploading. She opened the case file system and tagged it with the standard header. Traffic stop without legal cause. Subject showed resistance to procedural clarity. Dashcam active throughout. Her tone in the report mirrored her tone on the roadside, measured, factual, stripped of anger. It wasn't that she didn't feel it, it was that she knew the system didn't speak that language. The file synced, time-stamped, location-locked, a small piece of truth filed into the machinery that processed hundreds of such moments. She leaned back in the seat, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It should have ended there. A small, routine report, an unremarkable morning folded into the archive. But when she glanced at her inbox, the system alert was already waiting. Cross-reference match, 3 prior stops in the past 2 months, same precinct, same neighborhood, same hour of day. All involving black drivers, none resulting in citations, none producing evidence. The word at the top of each entry was the same, preventative. Dana stared at the screen, the pattern arranging itself in quiet, damning lines. This wasn't a mistake. It was a habit. And habits, she knew, were harder to dismantle than policies. She added one more line to her report before closing it out. Incident mirrors existing pattern. Recommend review. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But in her experience, the most dangerous truths rarely were. She powered down the device and stepped out of the SUV, the echo of her footsteps in the garage carrying her toward the elevators and the day waiting above. The call came sooner than Dana expected. It wasn't an email this time, but a direct message flagged Priority 1, summoning her to the 4th-floor conference room less than 2 hours after she filed the report. When she stepped through the glass doors, the air carried the low current of something bigger than a single morning stop. 2 attorneys from the Civil Rights Division were already seated, their laptops open, a projection screen glowing with a paused frame of her dashcam footage. Across the table sat a senior policy advisor she recognized instantly, the kind of presence that only appeared when something was about to shift. "Close the door," he said without looking up. Dana did, her pulse steady but aware. They rolled the footage without preamble. The scene unfolded in the same muted colors she remembered. The early light, The approach of Reynolds, the clipped exchange, the stillness that had hung like a wire between them. Her own voice filled the room, calm and low. "Is there a legal reason for a search?" No one spoke over it. No one needed to. When the clip ended, the policy advisor tapped his pen against the table once, a soft punctuation. "This," he said finally, "matches exactly what we've been tracking for the last 6 months." He turned the screen and Dana saw the map overlay, red pins clustering like a rash over Summit Ridge. Timestamps, demographic data, stop frequencies. It wasn't a hunch, it was math. The attorney closest to her leaned forward. "Your footage is the first with both visual and audio alignment to the reports we've collected. And because you're DOJ." He let the implication finish itself. Dana kept her face composed, but inside she felt the weight shift. What had been a single roadside encounter was now a thread woven into a much larger fabric, one the department had been trying to unravel in pieces. "We need to use this," the advisor said, his tone leaving no space for debate. "Not just internally, we're escalating this to a federal review." The second attorney clicked through 2 more files, and Dana recognized the pattern before she even heard the audio. Different drivers, different mornings, same language. "You don't live around here, do you?" "Just routine. With everything going on lately, we're being cautious." The same script, repeated with the same quiet certainty that no one was watching. Only now, they were. Dana sat back slightly, her fingers curling loosely against the armrest. This wasn't pride rising in her chest. It was something heavier, the knowledge that the clip wasn't remarkable because of what it showed, but because of how ordinary it was. The attorney with the legal pad looked up at her. "We're briefing the oversight panel this afternoon, and the Department of Justice will want you there. This isn't a single case anymore, it's systemic." The word landed with the kind of gravity that reshapes conversations. Dana nodded once, not slow, not eager, just accepting the shape of the path ahead. They talked logistics, chain of custody, confidentiality. She answered each question with the same calm she'd held on the roadside, though now it felt less like armor and more like necessity. When the meeting ended, the advisor paused at the door, looking back at her. "Do you realize what this is?" Dana met his eyes, her voice quiet but firm. "It's a pattern, and patterns don't break themselves." He gave a small nod, the kind reserved for understanding rather than agreement, and left. Alone for a moment in the room, Dana stared at the still frame frozen on the screen, her own face in profile, steady behind the wheel, the faint blur of Reynolds in the corner. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic, but it was evidence, and sometimes that was the most powerful thing you could hold. She closed her laptop and stood, the weight of the day settling differently now, not as burden, but as proof that silence, when captured, could speak louder than any raised voice. A week later, Dana sat at her desk long after the building had thinned out, the low hum of the city pressing faintly through the sealed windows. The sealed folder from the oversight panel lay open beside her keyboard, its contents marked confidential but carrying the quiet weight of a decision already in motion. Her footage, the simple, steady clip of a morning stop on Summit Ridge, was being converted into a mandatory training module for every flagged precinct in the region. She didn't feel triumphant. If anything, the weight sat differently now, heavier and more permanent. Her phone buzzed once, a secure message alert. It wasn't from a supervisor or a colleague, but an address she didn't recognize. She opened it and read the single paragraph slowly. "My niece drives through that neighborhood every morning to get to school. I used to tell her to keep her head down. Now I tell her to keep a dash cam. It's not justice yet, but it's a start. Thank you." The signature at the bottom identified the sender as a sergeant from a neighboring county. Dana stared at the words until they blurred slightly, not from sentiment, but from the sharp clarity of what they meant. This wasn't about one stop, one officer, or one video. It was about the quiet shift that happened when someone finally captured what everyone already knew but couldn't prove. She printed the message without thinking, slid the paper into a sleeve, and taped it to the inside of her locker. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what the work actually was. Later that day, the first draft of the training module arrived in her inbox. She clicked the file and let the video play, her own voice narrating over the muted footage. Calm, measured, without anger. Is there a legal reason for a search? The question hung in the clip the same way it had on the roadside, a line drawn gently but immovably in the sand. For the first time, she understood that the silence after it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every officer who would be required to watch, to pause, to feel that shift in their own chest before they ever approached another car window. That night, back in her apartment, Dana caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, jacket still on, tie loosened, the day hanging off her shoulders like a second skin. She didn't feel like a hero. She didn't even feel victorious. What she felt was something steadier, colder in a way, a sense of moral weight finally being noticed, if not yet lifted. The next morning, she wore the same black vest, the same white shirt, the same quiet armor of routine. This time she pinned a small lapel beneath the collar, a simple gift from a colleague who had watched the footage and said only, "You reminded me what this job is supposed to be." When she stepped into the conference room and cued the training clip for review, she didn't perform outrage or pride. She performed accountability, the screen lit with the frame of her behind the wheel, the officer's shadow outside the window, and her voice, calm and deliberate, asking the question that had become something larger than her own morning. It wasn't loud, it didn't roar, but it told the truth. And for now, that was enough. Dana understood then that real change rarely came in sweeping moments of triumph. It lived in the quiet choices made when no one was watching, in the refusal to surrender dignity even when the system expected silence. Her footage was just a video, but it became proof that stillness could be power, that calm could be resistance, and that a single question asked at the right moment could ripple far beyond one roadside encounter. For every driver without a badge, every voice unheard, the message was simple. Accountability begins with awareness, and awareness starts with refusing to let the ordinary go unnoticed. As you reflect on Dana's story, remember that small acts of courage can shift entire systems, and even silence can speak loudly when it holds the truth. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this. Stories that remind us that justice isn't built in headlines, but in the everyday moments where we choose to stand firm, stay calm, and demand better. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone still waiting to be seen.